He plainly told me that he didn't know what he was doing and was glad I was hired to handle all the complicated tasks. He was a good boss to work for, as he trusted me with the technical aspects, while he handled the simpler projects and kept annoying managers off my back. They tried to charge $30 for 4 items and $70 for 8. She asked me to look something up, even though she already had access to it. It took her 5 minutes to come to my office and request something that would have taken her 0.3 seconds to find on her computer. She also had no idea that one of the other customer service reps had been getting away with not charging customers for services, and another one was taking 2-hour lunches and 2 45-minute breaks. She was completely clueless, paying 5 people to do the work of 2. I used to work in computer repair. A new boss was hired, and it quickly became clear that she knew nothing about computers. Every morning, she'd ask me what I planned to do, and then repeat what I said as a command. I mentioned it to the receptionist, and she told me I was probably just overreacting. One morning, the receptionist was in the repair room and saw this conversation unfold. "Boss, Fievum, what are you working on?" Me: "I'm installing Windows on this machine, cleaning spyware from that one, and transferring data between those laptops." Boss: "Okay, I need you to install Windows on that machine, clean spyware from that one, and transfer the data on those laptops. Can you get all that done?" The receptionist's mouth dropped open. Fortunately, that boss didn't last long, and I moved on to better opportunities. I once had a boss who refused to register to vote because she didn't want to be selected for jury duty, but she ended up being called for it anyway, since there are other ways they pick people. She ended up serving for a week. She once told me I shouldn't have any trouble with a new task because it's not rocket science. Also, she says, specifically, I told my boss that we needed an industrial engineer to improve the efficiency of our department and machines, since he wasn't listening to me. He said, "No way in hell are we bringing in an engineer." 3 weeks later, the company hired one, and when the engineer came to our department, he asked my boss what changes he wanted to make. My boss froze, turned, and said, "Let's go talk to The Monkeyman. He's worked here a long time and knows what needs to be done." This boss makes at least double my salary, if not more. After they fired the woman handling HR, she wasn't qualified and had no training for it, so whatever. I overheard the boss talking to a coworker about it. "Boss, so what is HR?" Coworker: "Human resources." Boss: "Yeah, but what do they do?" Coworker: "They handle employee conflicts, internal complaints, and things like that." Boss: "Well, we don't need that. Besides, you can do that." Now we don't have HR, and as a bonus, the coworker they were talking to handles conflicts by telling people to fill out a hurt feelings report. And yes, it's a family-run business. He asks me to do tasks that are unhelpful or don't improve anything. He has us working on things that he literally can't explain why we are doing. I worked for a production company that never spent any money promoting our products. He told me that instead of accepting a higher-paying job elsewhere, I should just work more hours at my current position with him. I write a colon and a right parenthesis on the papers I grade for a professor. He accused me of writing slurs in my native language, even though it's just a freaking smiley face. He couldn't do basic math while pretending to have a master's degree. He couldn't use Excel either. My manager told me to mop the break room floor. I did, and then she freaked out that it was slippery, just 2 seconds after I finished. A teacher had an administrator who had spent his entire career as a basketball coach and ISS teacher. He got his master's degree online while working in the ISS room. One day, he saw me teaching and got upset because a student in the back wasn't paying attention. "We gotta get everyone infinitely focused," he said. I responded, 33 out of 34 kids in this room are passing geometry. This is the only class where this student hasn't been kicked out multiple times this year, and he's respectful and well-behaved. He shouted, "Doesn't matter! He needs to take notes and pay attention." Long story short, I got written up for having one of the worst kids in the school sitting quietly at the back of the room, causing no issues because he wasn't working. That student ended up with a 77 on the final and passed with a 61%. When I created functions for similar tasks, instead of copying and pasting the same code and changing it in multiple places throughout the program, my boss asked, "What if we hire a developer who doesn't know how to use functions?" Then we shouldn't have hired them in the first place. I was a young woman in my 20s, working at a Mormon-owned company with many branches. All the bosses were men, and all the office staff were women, making me the odd one out. Someone from out of state, not Mormon, with a math education, neither a boss nor a secretary. Before this job, I had only worked as a waitress. I ended up attending many meetings with all the men in their suits, thrilled to finally be doing real work. It was around 1980. It only took about 10 minutes to realize that of the 8 or 9 men at the conference table, only 2 or 3 were sharp, another 2 or 3 were average, and the rest were just filling time. The big boss who hired me was a complete fool. He couldn't follow an argument to save his life, and I later learned he had married into the family that owned the company. The branch he was in charge of was the easiest to manage. It was a huge shock, as I'd always assumed that the men in suits were smarter than everyone else. But in reality, my construction worker brothers and waitress friends were far more capable than these well-paid, comfortable people. She has no understanding of basic 101 knowledge in our industry that even a new intern could show off. Now, I have to explain everything I do from the beginning. What it is, why we're doing it, and why it matters. She nods, makes a wise comment, and then forgets it entirely. I'm the only one on my team with real experience in some areas, so naturally, I'm doing all the work there. When it's time for credit, it's a team effort, and she claims to have led it all. There was a time when he got extremely passive-aggressive a few months after hiring me, which eventually reached its peak when he shouted, "I hired you because I thought you were going to run this company for me." I'm a graphic designer, by the way. My manager, a woman in nursing school, thought that women were pregnant for 12 months. At my previous job, which involved hardware, paint, and tools, they promoted a strange guy. One of his first orders was that we all wear large yellow buttons that simply said "Yes" in black block letters. The idea was that no matter what the customer wanted, we had to say yes. I asked, "Well, what happens if they ask for a product that doesn't exist?" This happened more often than you'd think. He told me to just figure it out for them. All right then, good conversation. And if he ever overheard me telling a customer, "Sorry, but semi-solid water-based oil sealing and boat paint in a matte gloss finish doesn't exist," he would step in, cut me out of the conversation, and sell them something completely wrong for what they needed, which led to returns that were nearly impossible to handle without saying, "I'm sorry, but yes, my boss is an idiot." I spent a lot of money renting art from a museum's art bank for our office in Chinatown, which was falling apart. Then there was no money left to pay salaries. When I worked in construction, the director was a guy who couldn't use Word, Excel, or PowerPoint. He couldn't even open a blank document, and he didn't know anything about sequence design, piles, or reading contracts properly. He just had a commanding presence and spoke like a politician. But if you talked to him about details for even 10 minutes, you'd realize he didn't know anything. He had seriously faked his entire career with nothing but his gift of gab. Once, I told my boss I was a third of the way through the work I had to do. He said, "Well, you better hurry." The others said they've finished a sixth of the work. He walked away, and I just stared at him for a few seconds. He spends money on fun events instead of hiring people when we're severely understaffed. She needed to send an email to an important person, so she forwarded me a long email chain and told me which email needed a response. Instead of replying herself, She wanted me to reply with her exact wording, which she emailed to me. She included an image she needed me to insert into the email. She didn't know how to do that, so I had to send it from my email on her behalf. The image was a screenshot of just 6 words of text. I worked for a mid-sized engineering and manufacturing company. The owner had started the company from scratch, held several patents, had proprietary machining processes, and a loyal customer base. His son, not so much. Nepotism destroyed the company. We couldn't keep qualified staff. And of course, that loyal customer base disappeared quickly. The son probably made a lot of money, but not for long. He keeps asking me why the inventory looks dirty, physically dirty, but doesn't care about its accuracy. My job has nothing to do with the warehouse. I'm an operations analyst. When I worked as a pastry chef for a catering company, my boss would eat the pastries I prepared for tastings, even though he was supposedly on a diet, and claimed it wasn't him. He finally stopped blaming the cleaning staff when the other manager threatened to review the security footage. I had never worked in a commercial setting before that job, but I streamlined the inventory and ordering system within 2 days, pointed out that their dessert pricing model was losing money, and then gave my notice 6 months later when I found out the boss had lied about offering health coverage. Since I turned 26 and couldn't stay on my parents' plan anymore,